Recording's on. So
All
the
right.
floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Treat, for inviting me. Very happy to be here. It's a pleasure to see all your faces. And I'm sure that for all our groups that are now meeting virtually, it's sure a lot better than not meeting at all. I think about half our groups, are more than half, are meeting via Zoom or some other platform. So it's a good technology. It allows us to keep things going, keep the unity and continuity going during these hard times. But as I said, I'm happy to be here, and I was invited to speak on chapter 2 to finish some of the essays in my book. If it's okay with you, I thought I would first give you a little update on what's going on at Alcott, the national headquarters. Is that okay? Yep. Some of this information you may have already heard, but on March 17th, which was a Sunday, that was the last day that we had any programs at headquarters, and then we went on furlough the following Monday, the 18th, or I should say we closed down. And the building is still closed down. At that time in March, most of the staff was put on furlough except for a few essential workers, which would be people in the Quest bookshop to process orders coming in, the person in finance, and a few things in programming. I was put on furlough for 3 weeks, and we have a staff consisting of about 45 people, full-time and part-time, but the vast majority was put on furlough. And then starting in late April, people were starting to be called back to work. I was one of the first people to be called back, and about every 2 or 3 weeks, Barbara would call a few back. So right now, I would say most of the people have been called back. They may not be working full time. A lot of people are working from home. It's possible to do a lot of your work from home, but in my case, I have to come into the office because I supervise the prison program. So I have to physically handle and process the incoming mail from the Postal Service and process the outgoing mail. So I usually go in about 2-3 times a week, and then I do the rest of my work from home. We were not sure what was going to go on when we had to close, because we pull in a lot of income from our programs, our Thursday night programs, our classes during the week. And so we heard about the PPP loan from the government that the Trump administration was making available to small businesses. So Paul Thompson, he's our chief financial officer, he, along with Floyd Kettering, our national treasurer, they looked at the requirements and what we had to do to qualify. And I'll make a long story short. They put in many, many hours, but the bottom line is we were granted a PPP loan. That stands for Paycheck Protection Program. And we were awarded $255,000 under the PP loan. Now, you have to follow the guidelines. You have to use that money properly as they state in the documents, and we have been doing that. So the idea is that if you follow the guidelines, you can apply for what they call forgiveness. That's the technical word, forgiveness, meaning that you don't have to pay it back. So it's like a grant from the government, and many, many thousands of small businesses have applied for that. So that's been very helpful. But we also sent out a crisis appeal in March. I believe it was around mid-March or so. And that came out. Some of you have seen that. And many of the people from Texas and Houston made generous donations. So thank you if you're one of those people who did donate to the crisis appeal. And the last I heard, we had hundreds and hundreds of donations, probably close to 500 people donated various amounts from $25 to $100 to $1,000. And we have raised, according to Beverly, who works in the membership department, the last I heard, we've raised over $80,000, which is very, very helpful. During the board meetings, which we had online, and Mr. Van Lee was there, he's one of our newest directors for the Central District. The other new director for the Central District is from Canton, Ohio. That's a young fellow by the name of Noy Chowdhuramani. But as Van Lee knows, we've been pulling in a lot of online programs, and we've been raising money that way. We don't have any buildings in the, we don't have any programs in the building. We can't open the building yet. So that's put a lot of pressure on our programming department to make everything online. We've been doing very well, actually better than expected. We try to have a Saturday workshop 3 or 4 times a month. And I heard that the last one we had, William Meter, who's one of my favorite lecturers, he had 70 people attend the workshop. So those are going very well. And John Chanciosi, who's the program director, his report was that he was surprised at how well we were doing. So in other words, the members and our friends of the society are logging on or signing up for the online programs, and it's doing very well. Also, the bookshop, you may be interested to know, they were totally closed during March, April, and I believe it was in June that they started opening for customers, but it was only for curbside service. You would place your order by phone or internet, and then you would drive up and somebody from the bookstore would walk it out to your car. They were making some sales at, but maybe 1,000 a week, which is not much at all by normal sales standards. Then in July, based on Governor Pritzker, he's the governor of Illinois, what he allows businesses to do, we were able to open up the bookshop on an appointment-only basis, and our bookstore sales like doubled or tripled. So we went from about 1,000 a week to 5,000 or 6,000 a week. And so that's helping. All that is helping. We're still way down from where we would normally be, as are most businesses. Restaurants, they're operating at 50% capacity, but it's better than nothing. And we're doing okay. And we hope things in Illinois seems to be, as far as the corona thing, it seems to be, the new cases seem to be going down. So we're hopeful, but Barbara has not given us a date as to when we can open. And so we'll see what happens. We had our summer conference in July. It's the first time since World War II when we did not have people come to the National Center. And I think it was 1942 or 43. That was during World War II. We didn't have a summer conference then either. But this year, because we had the technology, we were able to hold an online summer conference. And I'm told we had very good registrations. I don't have the exact number, but I think it was over 200, which was good. And did any of you see the opening night, Friday night opening night ceremony? That was well done. I thought it was beautiful. Very good job they did. And beyond that, the department heads at the National Center, we're having our regular monthly meetings, but we do it on Zoom. So we get together and we each tell each other what we're doing and discuss issues and what's going on. So we're all in touch, we're in constant communication. So under the circumstances, I think things are going as well as can be. There is one unfortunate thing that happened. I don't know if any of you heard about our librarian, Marina Maestas. Anybody hear what happened to her? Oh, well. She was in a bad traffic accident on July 29th. She was in her car in Wheaton, and she got hit by a train. And the attorneys say that the signals were not working. It was one of these. It was one of these trains that they use for repair work. It goes on the tracks. It's a big. I saw a picture in the newspaper. It looked terrible. But anyway, she was in a hospital. She was in a coma for about 10 days. And she just came out of the coma last Saturday or Sunday. But she's got a lot of serious injuries. She's in critical condition. Since she came out of the coma last weekend, she's had 2 surgeries. But she's really in bad shape. I don't know when or if she'll be able to come back. So that is really, we're all praying for her and hoping that, praying and hoping for her recovery. But I'm afraid it's going to be a long, long haul. I saw the picture in the local newspaper, and where that train hit her car was right on the driver's side in the front. It was just like, oh, horrible, horrible. It was just horrific. So it was very unfortunate. Actually, the police department said she is lucky to be alive. They don't know how she survived, but she may not be coming back to work for a long time. So we've called back one of our assistant librarians, Ruby Lisa. Ruby Lisa had been on maternity leave for a few months, but she's now back, and she's going to take over for Marina in her place. Hopefully, we will be able to open up the library soon on an appointment-only basis, but we'll see how that goes. So that's all I had to say as far as news from headquarters. Any questions or comments on that?
Mr. Bruce, I have something to add up. Like you say that everything is correct. At first, I want to thank you to all the members for all the Central District. July, I become a director of the Central District. And right now, even I at the Houston Law for all the Central District, I will try to attend and help everybody. So Jake, I will keep an eye on you. So yes, one more thing I wanted to add in is, you know that we have a lot of lecture and video. It's been put on from the headquarters. So everybody feel free to get on it and get onto the YouTube and study it, to learn it, to watch all the video. And don't forget to put like, because the more people get involved with it, that will help a little financial for the headquarters. So keep getting there, watching it, and don't forget to subscribe and like. That one thing I said I want to add on.
All right, thank you. So I sent Treat an email a couple days ago, and I said I didn't really have the time to create PowerPoint. I did a Zoom presentation to the lodge in Washington, D.C. last month, and I had a real elaborate PowerPoint. And I like doing PowerPoints, but for some reason I just didn't have the time. And he said that's quite okay. Probably people would just enjoy looking at each other and talking. So anyway, I apologize.
I prefer that too.
Yeah.
I prefer that. We're death by PowerPoint.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sometimes people, it gets overdone. I remember many, many years ago when I was working in the electronics business, we would have these sales rep come in on Monday morning to push their products. And they'd have these PowerPoints, and they're saying the same thing that's up on the screen. I'm going, well, you know, what a waste. But no, PowerPoint can be very helpful, but I don't have one. I apologize. But I think it'll be.
That's okay.
Okay, great, great. As you know, this book, it's a book of essays. There's 144 essays in here that I wrote over a period of 12 years. They're very short, but they're all on theosophical topics or spiritual topics, or they're on the Theosophical Society. They're within that, you know, ballpark, let's say. Before I get into the rest of chapter 2, which we're going to discuss today, there's 5 essays left. I wanted to just say a word about essays in general. Not my essays, but a lot of people have written essays, and it's probably helpful if you're going to study a book like this, which is a book of essays, to know something about the purpose and nature of essays. They're not something you go through for instruction like you would in a book. They're not expository necessarily. They're not treatises. They're short. Generally, they're short. It's defined as a short literary composition. And short can be, you know, 500 words, 1,000. Some are longer, but they're not necessarily systematic in their presentation. In other words, they're not going to present a whole topic going logically from A, B, C, all the way to Z. That would be in a book, you know, where you want to definitely cover a topic and learn about it. That's a different thing. But essays, the authors or the people that write them, they're kind of free. They're kind of free to float around, and it's not like a treatise or a dissertation. And so in that sense, an essay treats a topic from a somewhat limited point of view, and it's also personal. Now, if you're going to read a book like Man, God, and Universe, like by Taimni, it's very detailed, it has many chapters, it's laid out in a logical sequence. There's nothing personal about that. But essays, by nature, by definition, there's an element of personality in that. Now, I recall many years ago listening to an audio cassette. It was a lecture by Jeffrey Hodgson. Anybody, you've heard of Jeffrey Hodgson? He's long gone, but he was during the last century. He was very popular, very spiritual man. I forget what the talk was that I was listening to. I think it was something on how to give a theosophical talk, how to give a lecture. And this was his approach. He said, avoid talking about yourself. Now, I know today, a lot of people are all about themselves. They get up there and they're talking, I did this, I said that. And audiences, to be honest, a lot of them like that. They like to hear the personal element. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that. But Jeffrey Hodgson's style, which I tried to copy or emulate, let's say, is to avoid talking about David Bruce. You know, I'm not that exciting of a person, and I don't want it to be about me. If I talk about theosophical topics, I want it to be about those topics. Now, there are a few places in the book where I do bring in the personal pronoun I, and I might relate a little anecdote that happened to me some years ago. But the reason I do that is because I felt that was a good way to illustrate the point I was trying to make. So you'll notice that very few of the essays am I talking about myself. However, they are personal in other ways. And how is that? Well, you don't have to use the personal pronoun I, but it becomes personal, in other words, by the authors that I cite. If you look through the index of my book, which was done by Janet Kirshner, she's our archivist, she did a very good job on it. There's a lot of people that I quote. So in a sense, that's personal because you can look and see what I read. These are books that I've read, people that I've been drawn to, like Emerson, T.S. Eliot, Aristotle, Cicero. So in that sense, it's personal, that it tells you a little bit about the writer, what his interests have been. And that's true of anybody who writes essays. So some of the famous, I would say in the Western tradition, the first person that really popularized the essay as a writing form was Montaigne, Michel de Montaigne. He was the French philosopher. He lived in the 16th century. I've got a couple of books of his complete essays. They're very readable even today, but his are very personal. He talks about a lot of the people, the classics, you know, Plato and so forth, Aristotle. He talks about the people that he read. They're very conversational. Then an English writer, Francis Bacon, you've heard of him, I'm sure. I've got one of his books, Complete Essays. I love the essays because they're short. There's something you can read in a short span of time. You know, most of us are very busy these days, right? Especially if you have family with children. But even if your kids are growing up, you're still probably, everybody seems to be so darn busy these days. And I found that when I came home from work and I'm tired, I didn't really want to jump into a big heavy book, but something with either short stories or essays was perfect. You know, you can read it for a half hour, 45 minutes. And Francis Bacon is another one. His essays are usually very short, under 1,000 words. I mentioned Ralph Waldo Emerson, the transcendentalist philosopher. He lived in the early 19th century, and his essays can run up to 7,000 words. They're very, very deep. So within the form of the essay, you have all these different styles ranging from Emerson, Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon's essays are almost aphoristic, very, very short sentences. to Montaigne were very personal, and he tells little stories about people that he talked to and so forth. Some people are not that crazy about the essay form. Aldous Huxley, he was not a fan of the essay form, and he defined it once as, quote, a literary device for saying almost anything about everything. Unquote. So I thought that was kind of funny. A literary device for saying almost everything about anything. Well, my essays aren't about anything. They're about theosophy primarily. And I don't try to say everything there is to say because, you know, when it comes to theosophy and these topics, nobody has the last word, right? Who can say the last word? Nobody. I mean, there's always something more to say. You'll note that my essays are short. If you read the introduction to the book, you'll understand why they're short. They're usually 350 to 450 words. There is an advantage to that for you as a reader in that they're short. They're very short. They don't take a lot of time. But I would suggest when you read essays like that, especially like mine or Bacon, when they're very short, don't read too many at once. Read one or two, go slowly, and then stop. You don't read it like a novel, like you're reading Moby Dick or Steinbeck's Mice and Men. You know, you read chapter after chapter. An essay, and I've tried to do this, is meant to be provocative, stimulative, and suggestive. So I've tried to do that by choosing my words carefully, cutting out a lot of the unnecessary words, the superfluous words, and trying to choose, you know, if you're going to limit yourself to 350 or 400 words, you got to be very, at least I feel, very careful with the words that you choose so that you don't waste your reader's time. And that's what I've tried to do. Hopefully I've been successful in that. Now, another thing you can do with essays that you can't do if you're writing a textbook like Man, God, and Universe by Timely is you can vary the tone, the mood. It can change. You can't do that in a textbook. That's all. A textbook is generally very serious and very dry. But in an essay, you can be reflective, you can be whimsical, you can be provocative, you can be inspirational. I've tried to be a little bit of that here and there. I know you're only on chapter 2, but if you continue on through the book, you'll see that elements of that change of tone. But the main thing is, when I wrote these essays, the cardinal sin I wanted to avoid is boring people to death. I don't want to bore people because, as I said, people are busy. There's gazillions of books out there. There's so many things to read. And if people come to an essay by David Bruce, I don't want to waste their time. I want them, even though it's short, it won't take long to read, I want them to feel that it was worth their 5 or 10 minutes that it took them to read. And hopefully I will arouse some thinking about certain ideas. And I found that a lot of groups now have been using this book for their discussions. They're kind of designed, as Michael Holmes said in the forward, they're really good to use for discussion. You can read through it quickly. The group in Fresno has done that. The DC Lodge has done that, and others. The Abraxas in Pennsylvania. And, you know, as Theosophists, we all like to talk over these ideas and discuss them. So, any questions on any of that before I start into the essays themselves? Any comments? Okay, I assume you've all got the book or you've read that section, the second half. And so there's 5 essays here to complete chapter 2, which is under the subheading Human Nature. The first 4 essays are, I came up with this phrase, the secular trinity. Now, how many, I've got 4 of those essays. The trinity is what, 3, right? Can anybody explain why there's 4 parts to something on the topic of the Trinity, which is 3?
Because you wanted it that way.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you why. Okay, because the first one is kind of a short overview of all 3. And then number 2, 3, and 4, I discuss each one singly.
Oh, okay.
That's why I did it.
I got it now.
Yeah, yeah. So I just wanted to make that clear in case anybody wondered, why is there 4 when he's talking about 3? So the first cover is like a short overview, very short. And I kind of like that title, The Secular. Did that arouse anything in your mind when you saw that? Any thoughts? Do you recall what your first reaction was?
Curiosity.
Okay.
I was asking myself, are you going to relate this to the Trinity as expressed in the Christian religion?
Well, that's a logical thought, right? Because usually we associate the Trinity with religion, not just the Christian religion, but Hinduism, other religions, they have their triune. So that's. But the idea here is we're talking about, in religion, the Trinity is very important. But for people that live a worldly life, which is to say a secular life, it's kind of a play on words. They have their things that motivate them, their highest values, their highest priority. And I kind of looked at that, looking at society and history, and I thought, it's actually a kind of a trinity here, a secular trinity. So I start off with the first sentence. I'll just read it. Those souls driven by, let me get this up where you can see it here. There we go. For those souls driven relentlessly by worldly ambition, the secular trinity of wealth, fame, and power prevails. So we've got the 3 things. Let's just repeat those: wealth, fame, or notoriety, and power. And I said, now who am I talking about? I'm talking about those souls driven relentlessly. So this is not your average person, right? This is somebody who's driven. And if we stop and think, every one of you, I'm sure, can think of countless examples of people like that, whether it was fame or power, whatever it was that they were pursuing, they were driven, sometimes from an early age.
Hollywood, right?
What's that?
Hollywood.
Yeah, well, fame comes in many different flavors, right? There's many shapes. Now, remember, I was just saying I chose my words carefully, or I tried to choose my words carefully because I'm limited to 350, 450. For those souls, what if I had said for those people? And the rest of the sentence remains the same. For those people driven relentlessly, etc. How would that change? It would be a subtle change, I think, but how would that change the whole context of that sentence? Or would it? I would suggest that by using the word souls instead of people, which I had considered, it implies that this is something more deep-rooted inside of us, not just a superficial thing. So the first sentence points to others. We're talking about those people, those souls who are really driven. They're highly motivated to achieve one of these 3 things. Now the next 2 sentences turns it around and points it to us, the reader. I'll read those. And I'm reading now. Yet, even among those possessing more modest levels of ambition, it's probably you and I, who has not at one time or another longed for more money, wider recognition, or a larger sphere of influence, right? I mean, which one of us can honestly say, raise our hand, say, I have never dreamed about having more money or more recognition or more influence? Come on, I mean, I think all of us, at one time or another, even if only for a short time, we've entertained those notions. I'm not going to ask you, but I can tell you that years ago, when I was in Milwaukee, I was working for the Theosophical Society in Milwaukee and putting on programs. I was the president, I was the vice president, I was working very hard. And many times there would be only small numbers of people showing up. And sometimes I would think, is this all I can do to be a worker in the society, you know, in this little Milwaukee lodge? Also at that time, I was married to a woman that had a gambling problem that I didn't know it. And it seemed like I could never keep up with my bills. Well, I didn't know she was gambling until much later. And so I was wishing for more money, you know, just to pay the bills, to pay off the credit cards, that kind of thing, you know, pay for the car repair. So these are normal things that I think that most people at one time or another wish. But that's quite different than a person or a soul who is relentlessly driven. It becomes their primary motivation in life. So let's continue. Some think that being rich would solve all their problems, that being powerful would make life exciting, that being famous would be happy. But there's a downside, is there not? If you really think about each one of those, isn't there a downside? Let's say you have a lot of money. Okay, let's just imagine a scenario where you have a rich aunt or uncle leaves you a huge sum of money. Where is your mind going to go? That's going to be like a big magnet, right? First of all, you're going to be excited, and you're going to get calls, you know, from your family, and you're going to have people calling you, long lost friends that you never knew you had. You know, your second distant cousin. Oh, how are you, David? Oh, right. It's been, you know, we ought to get together. We haven't seen you for 35 years. We think about you so much. I mean, you're going to get all these disingenuous people calling you, telling you they're your best friend. And then you got that money, and then you're going to have to think, what am I going to do with it? You're going to have to think, am I going to spend it? Am I going to invest it? You don't know anything about investing, so you're going to have to hire an investment advisor. And he's going to say, well, you put some in stocks, some in bonds, blah, blah, blah. Then are you going to stay up night worrying about, you know, your investments if there's a bear market on Wall Street? So all these things that never entered your mind before, suddenly you're going to have to worry about it. And then when people know that you have this money, be honest now, people are going to come up to you, and in some part of your mind is, what are they really after? Why are they being so friendly to me? You know, what do they want? And being famous, you know, Hollywood celebrity status is so sought after these days. But if you're really well known, if you're a household word, you can't even go out to a restaurant without people coming up and bothering you. Can I have your autograph? Or I saw your last movie, it really stunk. Or, you know, you're out with your children, your family, you're trying to have a little private time, and you can't. So being famous is not all it's cracked up to be either. And powerful, if you're powerful, whether it's in business, maybe you've climbed the corporate ladder, you have to worry about somebody else shooting for your job. Somebody else is right behind you, some person driven by ambition. And you want to hold on to that job, but you have to defend it. So there's all this. When you get in one of those areas where you have lots of money, lots of power, or lots of celebrity, it changes your life. I always laugh when I hear people win the lottery, a big amount, and they say, I'm just going to be the same old Joe. No, you're not. No, you're not. There are actually documentaries on YouTube and other places, Netflix, with people. It shows how many people's lives have been ruined by winning the lottery, ending up in divorce, bankruptcy, you know, because they didn't know how to handle it. They've never had a lot of money. Suddenly they did, and they did a lot of foolish things. So anyway, now I'm going to continue. Those of us attempting to lead a spiritual life, this is from my book, we might reflect as to whether our hearts are still capable of being stirred ever so faintly by these secular gods. A lot of people who join spiritual organizations or devout Christians or devout Muslims, whatever, and I've been around a lot of groups, it's almost like they think they can't be touched by these secular gods. They think they're above it. And maybe they are. Maybe some of them are. Maybe they've elevated their thoughts to the point where they're no longer influenced by desire for money or fame. But I'll tell you what, you don't really know until you've been tested. You really don't know. You can imagine I'm beyond this or that, but until karma brings a test to you, you don't really know for sure. So I would suggest we shouldn't be too confident that we're immune to the attraction of these powerful forces. They are very powerful. So then I go on. It is fairly easy for some to eschew money and power. But what about recognition and reputation? According to the Roman historian Tacitus, even with philosophers, the passion for fame is the last weakness to be discarded. Hang on a second, I got a little message here. There we go. So Tacitus was a Roman philosopher. He lived in the 1st century. He's one of the great Roman historians, and his writing style was marked by being very compact and very brief. Just a footnote, his greatest works were the Annals and the Histories. They're still read today. They're sold on Amazon. And if you look at HPB's collected writings, she mentions Tacitus quite a few times. So, but he said, now here's the question for you. Why do you think it is that fame, according to Tacitus, is one of the last things that people relinquish? Apparently it's easier to get rid of the desire for money or fame. Or power, excuse me. Money or power, but fame, according to him, really, it's a tough one to crack, to detach ourselves. Do you have any ideas on that?
For the philosopher, fame is the wealth that they are craving.
Anybody else?
It's the time aspect of it. It's timeless, right? You're trying to become timeless piece.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets to our ego, right? We realize that we're only going to be here for a period of time. Eventually, we're going to leave this earth. But if we can become famous for something, writing a book, inventing a new invention, whatever, people will remember us and talk about us after we're gone. That's a very powerful, powerful thing. So as I said here in the book, fame can outlast us, whereas wealth and power are dissipated upon our demise, if not before. Worldly power, it's often subject to the winds of fortune, things beyond our control. Money, possessions, they can be lost in a flash. You know, your house, if you have a hurricane, you guys in Houston, you're accustomed to, Florida, places that have these violent storms, you can be wiped out in a weekend with a hurricane. But if you read a book or you do something else, you got your name out there. So even amongst philosophers and spiritual people, this little thing within us, this little ego is still there. So let's not fool ourselves and think we're totally 100% beyond that. We may be able to forget the ego from time to time, and that's good, but let's not be overconfident, because just like seeds that in the garden, sometimes the seed doesn't germinate in one season, but it lays dormant till the next season. for whatever reason, these little desires, these skandhas, as the Buddhists call them, they're there deep within our psyche. And sometimes it just takes the right set of circumstances to bring them into germination. Maybe not in this lifetime, maybe in the next. So I said, in spite of our vigilance to be selfless, the yearning for recognition can subsist as a subtle and persistent psychological force. I think you've probably heard that maybe from many other great teachers said in different words, but I think that's a truth that most of us will recognize. And then at the end, the last paragraph, I offer a suggestion for dealing with that. I say one effective method for dealing with this is to seek opportunities for helping others. Take your mind off your own problems, take your mind off your own petty concerns, focus on others. Not 24/7, of course, but a portion of your time devoted to other people, whether it's your family, your friends, whatever. Maybe it's a charitable organization, maybe it's a Theosophical Society, whatever it is. And there's a paradox there, because by focusing on the needs of another, we become actually, I feel, more alive, more vibrant than when I feel that way when I'm helping others. I work with a prison program, and when I'm working with a prisoner, writing a letter, responding to questions, I try to help that person as best I can. I feel like I'm really alive, like there's a reason for my being here, rather than just tending to the mundane concerns of David Bruce. What am I going to get for groceries? How much is my car repair going to cost? Stuff like that, So there is a passage I quote from Voice of the Silence to end this essay. Give up thy life if thou wouldst live. Give up thy life if thou wouldst live. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to give up your life? We don't take that literally, right? This is a figurative giving up, not literally taking your life or suicide, but you'll find a passage very similar to this in St. Matthew's. It means give up the personal life, right? The life that is this small shell of personal concerns, and open up to the greater life, to open yourself up to humanity, right? Any questions? That's the part one, the secular Trinity part one. So that introduces the idea. And now in the next essay, I'm going to talk about power. So it is a cliche almost that power corrupts, right? We've heard that so much. Not necessarily, but when a person has a certain amount of power, there's a certain capacity or possibility, let's say, that power may be used not for good, but for bad. I quoted Edmund Burke, who was an Irish philosopher and statesman. He said, "The greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse. The greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse." And I love to read history. I've read the Federalist Papers, and the people that wrote those, John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton, they were very knowledgeable about history of the Greeks, Romans, and they studied republics, Europe, and going back to ancient times. And the way they formulated the way they designed our government was to have power split into three different branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. Because if you invest all the power in one person, like you have in a dictatorship, the temptation for mischief is just too much. So even if you look at normal people who have joined a society, many of them have an interest, especially when they first join. They have this interest in psychic phenomena, these psychic powers. They've read something and I can't tell you how many people, but lots. You can tell they're really interested in having psychic powers. But if you read the writings of Leadbeater and others, Annie Besant, if you read that carefully, you'll know that these psychic powers can be abused. How many of us could say that if we had the power to do astral projection, travel out of our body in full consciousness, we could go anywhere or watch anyone, how many of us could, I'm not asking, this is a rhetorical question, okay? How many of us can really say that we might not abuse that? I'm not sure I could even raise my hand. I mean, it's a really, to have a power like that 99.9% of humanity doesn't have, the temptation is tremendous. Now, talking about power in the world, you've heard of George Orwell, the English writer, 1984, Animal Farm, were some of his famous books that he wrote. He said, power is not a means, it is an end for some people. But he said, he was looking at the time he wrote, he was concerned with the communist and fascism. And he looked at those kind of people, they had a thirst for power. It was an end in itself. You go back a few hundred years more, I have a book in my library, Leviathan, that means a large animals taken from the Bible, but it means a huge animal. And Thomas Hobbes was a philosopher. Let's see, what was he? He was born in 1588. He was an English philosopher. He's mentioned once in Isis Unveiled, and also in Mahatma Letter 88, which in the old third edition is Mahatma Letter 10. That's the infamous Mahatma Letter on the Nature of God. But his views on human nature are not theosophical, but they were no doubt influenced because he lived in the time of the English Civil War, which went for a long time. There were many wars in Europe preceding that. So we're all conditioned by our environment that we live in. We can't avoid it. And so he was conditioned. He saw human nature at its worst. And this is a quote here. I don't agree with it, but I put it in here to be provocative because it is true in some cases. And here's what Thomas Hobbes states. I put forth a general inclination of all mankind. Well, I don't buy that. I would say some. But he says, of all mankind, a perpetual and restless desire of power after power that ceaseth only in death. Man, that is really a dark, dark view of human nature, isn't it? A perpetual thirst for power that only is extinguished when we die. The reason that statement holds up is because there's some truth in it. There are people, and there have been people, if you know your history, and even today, there are people that are motivated solely by that. It's all about power. So, in view of these warnings by Thomas Hobbes and others, I say, what is the role of power in the spiritual life? That's something we should ask ourselves, right? Is it something we should seek? Is it something we should be comfortable with? Power, that is. Or is it something we should be suspicious of or very, very cautious about pursuing? We recall this from Matthew chapter 18, verse 3. Unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Remember, Jesus talked about becoming like a child. And we don't associate power with little children. So this is a biblical statement. Becoming like a child is like becoming vulnerable, right? Innocent. You don't associate accumulation of power with a mental state like that, becoming vulnerable like a child. Now, on the other hand, you look at the book Light on the Path. How many of you have read that, are familiar with it? It's one of the theosophical classics by Mabel Collins. Very short book, Light on the Path, written in 1885. Came out before Voice of the Silence, before At the Feet of the Master. At the Feet of the Master, and those are three classics on the theosophical life. Well, Light on the Path is a very short book with aphorisms. Aphorism is a very short, condensed statement. It's very different in style from Voice of the Silence, which has long, poetic, flowing sentences. It's very different from At the Feet of the Master, which is pretty much prosaic, ordinary talking. Light on the Path is very almost opaque, meaning the statements are so short that you don't opaque, you can't see the meaning. So there's one in there, one of the rules is desire power ardently. Desire power ardently. This is from Light on the Path, a famous theosophical text. You compare that to the statement from Matthew, become like a child. Seems to be talking about two different things there. So that is definitely something to think about. By definition, power is what enables a person to produce a certain effect or achieve a certain end. If I'm a mathematician, I have the power mentally to do certain calculations. If I'm a trained artist, I have the power to create beautiful drawings or sculptures. If I'm a trained actor or actress, I have the power to create a character and get up on stage and become that character for an hour and a half or 2 hours. So power per se, I think you'll agree, is not necessarily good or bad, right? It's what you do with that power that then you can qualify it. This was a good use of power, that was a bad use of the power. So let's look at that statement from Light on the Path where it says, desire power ardently. We're talking about the secular trinity now. The other two are fame and wealth. Nowhere in Light on the Path does she say desire wealth or desire fame. In fact, those two words are not even mentioned anywhere in the text, I can guarantee you that. So here's just a food for thought. I'm not sure I have an answer, but I'm just throwing this out to you. Maybe somebody has a thought about this. Why wouldn't Light on the Path say desire fame ardently? Or why wouldn't it say desire wealth instead of power? Anybody have I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I don't even know, but sure seems like a question somebody should ask.
I believe the answer is kind of like with great power come great responsibility. So basically, if you desire the power, you better be ready to become more disciplined, right? You need to be able to take on that responsibility. And the only way that you can test yourself is you got to get that power, right? So I think wealth and fame, those are not, they don't, yeah, they're tests as well, but they not something that you would build. Well, they could certainly build your inner character as well, but the power is the thing that enable you to do stuff. Without that power, you cannot do anything. If I don't have the mental power to analyze something, like in the work that I do, then I couldn't even do my job at all. So you got to have that power in order to do help other people.
What Treat? What do you do for? What is your job? What is your vocation? Are you a engineer?
I am a consultant, a software consultant, and I consult for Shell. So most of the thing that I do is related to software and databases. So basically, you got to learn the skill set is first thing, but it's more important to have the mental capacity to analyze and diagnose stuff, right? Because that's how that you need to produce the actual result.
Yeah. So you have the ability to help companies with problems they're trying to solve because of your background, your training.
Mm-hmm.
And each of us, whether maybe we're an auto mechanic and we're helping people. Most people don't know how to change the replace the brakes on a car, or put a new replace the fluid on the brake system, things like that. So, Blavatsky had a lot of power, I think you'd agree, to express subtle, transcendent ideas in powerful language. That's a power, that's a rare ability. But she never had a lot of money, did she? If you read anything about her life, she was very poor.
Sorry to interrupt, but
please.
In talking about money, power, and fame, and the question you have, what is the role? So my question, so there's a lot of spiritual people are poor because they don't think they deserve money. So I believe that's a wrong belief. And we have to ask ourselves, if we're in a spiritual path, what is the role of all of this, money, power, and fame? Do we want to be famous or powerful or rich? Everything starts with an intention. If you have the wrong intention, of course, things can go the wrong way. So intention, have intention of what you want to achieve in the spiritual path. Be altruistic, be true to yourself, and everything in balance. Everything in balance. So let's not say money is a bad thing, power is a bad thing. These are all such extreme examples of people who have abused these things, right? But when it's in balance and used properly, we can use our power to help others. So we have attached, so it's what meaning you attach to those words when power has very bad connotation already. Money, haven't we heard money is the root of all evil? Is it really? Or is it something that was just instilled in her and says, oh, we don't want money? You know what? I still love money. Yeah. Because we need money to live in this 3D world.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. I agree with that. Actually, a lot of Christians who haven't studied the Bible carefully like to quote, they think they're quoting the Bible when they say money is the root of all evil. It doesn't say that. It says the love of money, the lust for money, which is a very different thing. We need money. Let's be realistic. You need money, but it's the lust, beyond, we need a certain amount to perform transactions, commercial transactions, that's fine. But these are, like I talked earlier about the Theosophical Society, the money that the bookstore was pulling in and the donations. We can't carry out our mission if we can't pay our people. We have to pay the ComEd, the electric company. We have to pay the water bill. We have to pay our phone bill. I mean, it's just the reality. And we have to pay health insurance for our employees. It's a big cost. But that's not our main purpose. We have money to carry out our main purpose. So I ended this essay. I just want to wrap this and move to the next one. Yeah, we have two more.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
First, I really appreciate that you tell us about Animal Farm and Lefifian of Hobbes. And I try to ask the question, what's from your point possibility to create power which will never hurt other people? Because the instinct for power in Hobbes and in Orwell is something which is natural. And as Shanti said, to get a balance will be almost impossible. I look the history of all great politicians, they always hungry the power, and without this hunger, they cannot reach their goals. And sometimes at the beginning, their desire of power and desire of the other people get the same unity. Only later they start to be dictators and so on and so on. And I have a simple question. Are the desire of power is in our psyche, is in our spirit, or it's just something like a deviant behavior? We cannot say that the power cannot be intelligent. It's like a salt, always will be salty, and the power is always a fight. And remember, you quote twice Matthew, Gospel of Matthew, but in the same Matthew, Jesus say, the kingdom of God take with boldness, with boldness. Yes, we need to have a faith like a child, but also in the same gospel, we say the kingdom of God is taken by boldness. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good.
Can I comment before you answer?
Who's talking? Where is it?
Ronald?
Oh, okay. Yes, please. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say on that subject, shouldn't we question the motives? Money is just a tool. I mean, it's just another thing that you could inherit power maybe, or inherit wealth, but what are the motives? I think that's important. Mm-hmm. That's just my comment. Thanks.
That's a good comment. I remember one of the Mahatma letters. I don't know which letter it was. I was talking to Senate, and he said something, I'm paraphrasing now, with us, motive is everything. Motive is everything. And as the other gentleman was talking about power, we all have seen terrible abuses of power by human beings. There's many, many examples. You know, it's very easy to find examples today, in former historical times. On the other hand, some of the people we really admire, great people who have helped the world in many great ways, they used their power for good, for altruistic purposes. You know, you can say, let's think of the Buddha. He had tremendous power to sway people towards a spiritual way of living. And even now, 2,500 years later, his teachings, his influence is still felt. Blavatsky, not comparing her with Buddha, but her writings, very powerful. The ideas that she brought forth, over 140 years later, approximately, people are still reading The Secret Doctrine, Isis Unveiled. It's still changing people's lives, giving them a new way of looking at things. And I'm going to just wrap up this portion with the last sentence that I used to close out this essay. And it's a quote by Houston Smith. Any of you familiar with him? He wrote it's in the index of my book. He wrote a book called The World's Religions. Very, very good. Anyway, he says, unlike spiritual values, wealth, fame, and power do not multiply when shared. They cannot be given away without reducing your own portion. But spiritual values, now that's the end of his quote, but spiritual values, they expand, they grow. So groups like the Theosophical Society and other, religious groups, when they're carrying out their mission, they're influencing people in a good way. And that is a healthy kind of power because you're helping to change people for the better. And the teachings of Theosophy are very powerful. I can't tell you how many letters I get from prisoners that for the first time, when they're exposed to theosophical books or teachings, they're just, they're amazed. And they want more. And it's, you can tell it's having an impact upon the way they view the world and themselves. So that was power. Now the next essay, part 3, is on wealth. And we can talk about wealth. Most people right away, what do you think of? Money, right? Investments, possessions. And those are all pretty obvious. And I think we covered the idea that, you do need money to pay the bills, to get basic necessities of life. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's kind of silly, I think, if you say, I don't want money in my life. I don't know, are you going to go live in a cave somewhere in the forest? Or I don't know what kind of an existence you're going to have. But there's other ways of looking at wealth, other ways of interpreting it. But it's actually kind of hard to find a universal definition of wealth, a definitive definition, because it's kind of a, as I said, I used the word, it's a moving target. What do I mean by a moving target? Well, it's both relative and subjective. So I use the example of a person living in this country, the average person, let's say. And the average person has a fairly comfortable existence when you compare it to somebody living in North Korea or some of the third world countries where they don't even have electricity. So relatively speaking, what would be considered an average or even so-called quote-unquote poor person in this country, somebody living in a concentration camp in North Korea would think, wow, that person really has got it made. You see the relativity? They've got a house. They may not have much money, but they still got air conditioning. They have their big flat screen TV. They got their iPhone. So there's the idea that wealth is relative. I use the other example that if you're a millionaire, maybe let's say you made your money honestly, you were a smart entrepreneur, you created a small company, it grew, and your assets increased, your company's product was in demand, and now you've got net worth of maybe $2 or $3 million. I'm saying hypothetically. This person may then, on one hand, feel successful. I've got it made. I've made the American dream. But then he may look at somebody like Warren Buffett or some other billionaire and say, wow, I don't have the big yacht that they have, or I don't have the 3 homes, one in Italy, one in Switzerland, So even amongst people with money, there could be that idea of relativity. There's always somebody that has a little more, and therefore there's a potential to be a little bit jealous. But there's also, now this is more important, subjectively. So if you're a person that is really into money, like I use the example of a Wall Street banker, well, your idea of wealth is probably to have a big fat portfolio, lots of blue chip stocks, bonds, maybe real estate holdings and so forth, maybe to have a second vacation home, material stuff. But what about somebody that didn't grow up or didn't go into the banking world, didn't go into the investment? What if you were a social worker, which I don't think get paid a lot, but they work with people one-on-one, people that are hurting, people that have problems, people that need help. Isn't there a kind of wealth there of experience and of memories of having helped many people who were at the bottom? They were in the pits, you know, the worst time of their life, and you're able to help those people turn their life around. I think there's a lot of great deep satisfaction that comes from that could be much better than being a banker who made a good score on Wall Street. So you made a lot of money, big deal. I think it's much more edifying to help somebody turn their life around. Or how about a teacher who loves their job? They love their subject, they love history or mathematics or chemistry, and the students that are drawn to them, they're able to convey the knowledge to stimulate an interest and spur them on to greater scholastic study. That's a kind of wealth. How about us in the Theosophical Society? We have a great wealth of knowledge, esoteric knowledge. We've studied the literature. The more you read, the more you understand. There is a whole kind of wealth there. We may not be a scholar, but and a scholar has wealth too. Somebody who's devoted their whole life to a certain field. It's a tremendous wealth. It's a gold mine. You can't put a dollar and cents figure on stuff like that. So in a subjective way, there's a different kind of a way of measuring wealth. Then I referred to a quote. I like to throw in a lot of little quotes. This is from John Ruskin. You may not know who he was. He was he lived in the 19th century, 1819 to 1900. He was an English art critic, a philosopher, a big philanthropist of the Victorian era. And I've read some of his works, and here's one of the lines, a very short, pithy sentence. There is no wealth but life. He had money. He was a philanthropist. He had money to, I don't know where he got it from, but no wealth but life. You have to think, what does that mean? I think of some of the examples I just stated. The teacher, the social worker, the teacher who love their work, who throw themselves into their profession, helping other people, that's a kind of wealth. And us, you and I, other members of the society, we study the teachings, we try to, as best we can, we try to incorporate them into our own life as much as we can. And we try to share that with other people if they show an interest. That's a tremendous wealth that we have, each one of us, our understanding, our insights. That's a wealth that we can share with other people. Like Houston, what was that quote I said? This is from Houston Smith, the last essay. Unlike spiritual values, wealth, fame, and power do not multiply when shared. But personally, when I share some of my insights with, let's say, a prisoner who I feel is ready, I just don't give it to anybody, but I have to feel that they're ready, receptive. I feel really good about, because I know I said the right thing. And often they'll say, Mr. Bruce, it was just the right thing I needed to hear at that time. Just a few words, a couple words of encouragement. You know, it can happen serendipity. One time I was getting ready to go jogging. There's what we call a prairie trail. It's a 20-mile trail where you got joggers and bikers. And it was in the summer, and I had my t-shirt on and my shorts and my tennis shoes. I was getting ready to run a few miles. And I got to the beginning of the trail, and there were several, you know, half a dozen or other runners stretching out, getting ready to go, or maybe they were cooling down. And I saw this couple, young couple, with back sacks. You know, they were obviously not running. I think they came from a homeless shelter, which was about 2 blocks away. And I looked at them while I was stretching, and I could see that they were asking for money. I didn't have money with me. I don't take my wallet when I go jogging, when I go running. I leave all that in the car. But I went up to the guy and I said, how are you doing? And I said, look, right away, I said, I don't have any money to give you. And I asked them, how are you guys doing? What are you up to? And they didn't have a home. I don't know what their full story was. But all I had to give him at that time was not money, but I gave him a few words of encouragement. And these were a young guy, about 23, young girl, pretty handsome guy. He started crying. Guy started crying because I took, a few seconds out of my day to try to give him some hope. I didn't have any money, but I gave him a few words of encouragement. So, things like that, when you have the opportunity, if I had let that go by, I've never seen the guy again. I don't know where he is. But when the Spirit moves you to do something like that, you got to do it, because the window of opportunity, it closes many times. So when the Spirit moves you to do something kind, do it. Don't say, I got to get moving. I'm late for my run. I could have said that. I could have said I'm behind schedule. It didn't cost me anything to do that. But I know from the way he reacted, it made a big, I think I helped him more than if I had given him $5. I would have liked to give him $5 if I had it, but I didn't. So I gave him some words of encouragement. So anyway, there's no wealth but life, helping people, loving people, being compassionate. That's what really the true measure of wealth is about, altruism. And I closed with a quote by Clara Codd. Have you heard of Clara Codd or read any of her? Oh, Leon is nodding her head, yeah. She was very popular as a speaker during the early 20th century. She was a fighter for women's rights. She actually went to prison for a short time, protesting against some unfair conditions in South Africa. Maybe it was apartheid, I'm not sure. But this is from her book. It's a autobiography called So Rich a Life, published in 1951. It's out of print, but we have a copy in the Olcott Library. She says, and I'm quoting, "A new age, a new world is being hammered out on the anvil of time. An age in which both war and poverty will cease to be. Do not let us desire, in these tremendous times of personal comfort and easy living, let us be willing to forego much that the future for which so many of our best youth died may be secure." In other words, you and I, we live in a society where we have a fairly good standard of living. And for many people, they're willing to settle for that, just having a comfortable home, paying their bills. I guess, I'm not knocking people that, if that's their big goal in life, I'm not knocking it, but there's so much more. There's so much more. And if you just settle for material things, you'll have a comfortable life. If you're smart enough to know how to make money, save a little bit, okay. It's certainly maybe better than being poor or not being able to pay the rent. But if you got your basic needs met, there's so much more that you can do to make your life. When we come to the end of our lifespan, they say we have a past life review. A lot of people say that. I suspect that's probably true, because we've heard testimony from people that had near-death experiences. They've come back. A lot of them said, yeah, I looked over my whole life in a split second. So imagine you're at that point sometime down the road when it's time to move on. You think you're going to really look back at, gosh, I had a nice car and I had this really nice house and the sofa was good and the rug was nice. Oh, I had a nice pair of shoes. They were $400 shoes. Even if you had all those things, I don't think you're gonna look at things like, how did I treat people? Did I raise my children well? Did I treat my husband or wife well? Was I friendly with people? What did I do with my life that was worthwhile? That I want to remember? Those kind of things. That's the real wealth of life.
I just read an article today. In today's situation, regardless of the kind of house you're living in, because of COVID, right? You still feel lonely and restless. So it doesn't matter what kind of house. It was a rapper from Houston that because he got hit by COVID. And when you're hit by COVID, It doesn't matter how much money you have or how famous you are.
Right. Yeah. That's another thing, just to keep all these things in perspective. sometimes people get jealous of the famous and the rich, and some people actually feel resentment against people that are, you know, in those categories. But I always like to say that those people have their problems too. If you really think about it, you could have tens of millions, your net worth. But how do you know that your children might not suffer from a fatal disease? Or you might lose your wife in a car accident. Bad things happen to those people too. They suffer too. So I think it's a delusion or an illusion to think that people that have wealth or fame don't suffer. They may not suffer the same way you and I do. They may not have to worry about how am I going to pay my, bills next month. They've probably got that taken care of, but there's other things that they can suffer. And I guess you don't really know until you get into that category, unless you read about those people, if you care to read about their lives. Or if you know somebody, then you'll realize, yeah, they got problems too. I don't think very few people come into this world and leave without having experienced some kind of suffering in some way. Some people suffer much more than others, more acutely, terrible suffering. But I think to some degree, almost everybody goes through some kind of suffering. And here's another thought. To the people that never had a spiritual, let me put it this way, to people that never felt the need to pursue religious studies, spiritual studies, to have a rich inner spiritual life, I think many of them are suffering in a different way. Their life is empty. They might have a satisfactory material life, but it's all on the surface. I know there are people like this. You read about it. You read about it, especially when people suddenly they discover something like Theosophy or Christianity, and they'll say, my life was an empty shell. It was a farce. I looked good on the outside. I smelled good. I dressed well, but my life was empty. Having an empty life, especially if you're getting up in years, you look back, you say, what was it all worth? What was it for? You might, the clock is ticking down. You know your time is running out. You say, what was this all for? So suffering, there's all different kinds of suffering, very many different kinds. So lastly, I want to talk about fame. I think we talked about this earlier. I mentioned the quote from the Roman historian Tacitus. And he said, the last worldly goal to be relinquished is the thirst for fame and glory. We talked about that a little bit before. I say, and I'm going to read now verbatim, some may think it is possible to achieve great renown and live a life of inner purity. Experience has shown, now when I say experience has shown, I'm not just referring to David Bruce, I'm referring to the lots of reading and listening that I've done of many people, their personal testimony. Experience has shown this not to be possible or even practical. Fame, it may come to a spiritual person, but if it arrives, it is incidental. In other words, that wasn't what they were seeking for. It came, but it was not their top priority. And it is true today as it was in days of old that one simply cannot serve two masters. Plutarch is another famous Greek historian, and he's mentioned, by the way, quite a bit in some of Blavatsky's writings. He has this wonderful quote. It comes from his books, Lives, which I have. It's the Lives of the Ancient Greeks. It's a 5-volume set, Ancient Romans and Greeks. But he says, the desire of glory has great power in washing the tinctures of philosophy out of the souls of men. Let me read that one more time. The desire for glory has great power in washing the tinctures of philosophy out of the souls of men. Now, the word tincture, I use that purposely. That word can mean several things. It can mean a trace, like a trace of doubt. In terms of color, it means just a slight shade or a slight hue of blue or red or yellow, but it can wash out. So this desire for fame, notoriety, glory, which this is timeless. This is a human condition thing. This is not just something today where we have the cult of celebrity. This was back in Plutarch's time and probably even before that. Back in the olden days, the upper classes of Greeks and Romans who were well-to-do, it was considered proper for them to study philosophy before they become a statesman or a general. So it was like the part of their education. Study a little Greek philosophy, read Plato, Protagoras, Seneca. But Plutarch is saying that all the studying they did is like a weak color in a t-shirt where you throw it in a washing machine, the color's gone. Because what washes it out? Not water, but the desire for glory. So he observed in the writings of Plutarch many famous people of his time, which the names you and I wouldn't know. You'd have to look them up at Wikipedia. Very famous people, all who had studied philosophy, but when it came to their opportunity to grab power, to be somebody, all that philosophy went out the window, put it in the back seat. So I think the message for us is as we study these teachings, let us take care that we allow it to go deep within the fabric of our being. That it's just not on the surface, something to entertain us, to amuse us, but that we really try to incorporate it into who we are. So this idea that you cannot serve two masters, I found a quote in Montaigne. Remember I mentioned the French philosopher Montaigne, who also wrote many essays, very enjoyable essays. I highly recommend them. He said, "Fame and tranquility can never be bedfellows." Fame and tranquility, they can't coexist. Remember what I said, if you're rich and famous, it's hard to go out to a restaurant and not be bothered, unless you go to an exclusive restaurant where they charge you maybe $20 for the salad and $50. I mean, you hobnob with the 1%ers, right? But you can't go to a McDonald's or IHOP without being, so it's very hard to be lead a tranquil life and worry about keeping your reputation up there on the front page. There is a Roman maxim that I quoted, sic transit gloria mundi. Good to keep that in mind. Sic transit gloria mundi, which means the glories of the world are fleeting. They're ephemeral. They don't last. Years and years ago, there was a pop artist in New York, Andy Warhol. He coined the phrase 15 minutes of fame. At that time, now it's probably 15 seconds of fame, but Andy Warhol said, everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame. Things that speeded up with the internet, and it's 15 seconds now. Everybody wants to be famous. And you see a lot of our kids doing stupid things on YouTube, doing crazy things just to get people to watch them, to get hits and likes. This is something, this idea for recognition is something deep-seated in human nature. It's timeless. It's part of the human condition. It's part of being a human being. And we have to recognize that if we want to know ourselves at a deep level and recognize it and find ways to deal with that and not let that steer us in wrong directions where we go down detours in life and end up regretting things that we did. Looking back years later, say 20 years ago, I took this U-turn and I wasted 20 years of my life doing nothing. So any thoughts on that? you know, you have this idea in the Bible too. I think this is from, Matthew here. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. He cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon is the word meaning material wealth or possessions. So yes, you can be a spiritual person and have a job and go to work and all that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about people that make as their utmost top priority one of those three items in the secular trinity, who devote, really, they have a craving thirst for it. And they're ruthless in the pursuit of it. They don't care who they step over to get there. Now, I don't think any of us fall in that category. But yet, when I referred to the analogy of a garden, be careful what seeds are under the surface. If you read the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and I.K. Tomney has a wonderful presentation, he talks about the seeds, metaphorically speaking, in our psyche. They have to be destroyed, these seeds that could go lead us astray. And as the writings of Leadbeater point out, we may think we're doing really well, and maybe we are, maybe we've made great progress. And people even come and say, wow, you've really changed, you're not as angry as you used to be, or you're more patient. But don't get too complacent, because there's a lot to do yet. And you may not know yet what challenges lie before you, because karma will only give you, we're told, within the lifetime, what you can really handle. So there may be much more that we have to deal with later, after we've built up our strength and our stamina and our moral fabric. So we never know what's coming down the pike. You can't be too complacent. Don't be too cocky. Especially, you know, when you're somebody, like in my position, my name is known, I get out there to a lot of groups. I can tell you, it'd be so easy for me to get a big fat head. Fortunately, I have my wife there to take a pin, pop the bubble. But you have to be careful about that. And it's good to see those things within yourself. After you have a success, you know, it's okay to pat yourself maybe on the back a little bit, because you probably worked hard, put a lot of work in. That's fine. Other people say, good job, David, or good job, Tree, or Mr. Lee, you did a wonderful job. And that's fine. You accept that respectfully, you know, politely. Thank you very much. But please don't dwell on that. I try not to dwell on it. I try to keep going ahead, because if I sit there looking at what I did yesterday, I'm not moving ahead. I'm looking in the rear view mirror. And all it takes for me, when I think like, okay, I came out with this book, I was very happy with it. I was very proud of this book, because I put a lot of effort into it. But at the same time, I know there's many, many other people who wrote much greater books, much greater, much deeper books than that. So this is just one out of thousands of books. So I don't let it go to my head. So now the last essay, which I will try to, this is talking about a very, very important thing in group work, which is enthusiasm. And I think I talked about how people coming to a Theosophical lodge may have their relationship, the dynamic that they have, falls into a spectrum of, it could be curiosity, it could be interest, or it could be enthusiasm. How many of you, if you can remember when you first came into touch with a Theosophical book, or maybe a Theosophist, was it curiosity? Was it interest? Do you remember? Anybody care to look that far back, that many years back? Or maybe
It was curiosity for me.
Curiosity.
Yes.
Curiosity.
Yeah, I think that's probably true for many people. And now curiosity can go two ways, right? It can just be, oh, that's what it is. Okay, oh, great. Okay, see you later, bye. Or it can say, well, maybe I ought to read that book, find out more, right? It could lead to interest, which is the next level. So you will get many people coming if your programs are open to the public. And we get this at headquarters too. When I was in Milwaukee, we get that. People would just show up curious, you know, you can tell if you talk to them. And that's not bad, that's not a bad thing. I'm not putting it down. But it can be very short-lived. It may not go anywhere. They've satisfied their curiosity, found out what the Houston Lodge was about, they think, because you really can't find out in a short visit, but they think they know. That's fine, they may come back later. But for the one that's interested, that's the person you might recommend a certain book, let's say, if they like to read. Or you might say, go to our YouTube channel and check out this guy or this gal. Then it moves to the next level, which hopefully I think most of you are probably at this level, which is enthusiasm. And that is what you're really aiming for. So I think rather than me ramble, let me just read. This is a very short essay, so let me just read here. By its very nature, curiosity is often short-lived, being easily satisfied with pleasantries and superficialities. This fact results in its moving on in search of further attractions or distractions. So, you know, curiosity is not a bad thing. I mean, if our engineers weren't curious, we wouldn't have all these wonderful inventions. We wouldn't have the automobile, we wouldn't have airplanes. If medical researchers weren't curious, we wouldn't have vaccines. You know, I could go on and on. You get the idea. Curiosity can lead to other things. So in terms of theosophy, curiosity can lead to a deeper exploration of the wisdom teachings, one that is persistent or characterized by a persistent level of inquiry. So at this level, curiosity has been morphed into sustained interest, and that's good. The casual inquirer, the casual inquirer now becomes, you might say, a student, a learner, seeking out more detailed knowledge, maybe reading pamphlets, maybe looking at online presentations. So that is a good thing. And you, as members of the society, you want to help these people along. If you recognize somebody in that stage, nurture them. But caution, this is something I used to be guilty of. It was hard for me not to do this because I was already at the enthusiasm level years and years ago. Be careful not to overpower those people with too much information, okay? You have a wealth of knowledge and somebody shows a little spark of interest and the temptation is, oh, I got to tell them everything I know. Big mistake. You got to learn to give them a little bit and then hold back. And then watch their facial reactions, watch how they react. Give them a chance. So you gotta, it's like, I'm not gonna use the fishing example, but you know, I'm not a fisher, but I know fishers, you know, sometimes you just play with the fish on the line, you just reel them in. But if you fight right away, he might tear off. If you come down too hard on somebody, they're gonna say, oh, this guy's a fanatic, kind of a weirdo, you know, talking about secret doctrine and chakras, Atma, Buddhi, you know, you can scare away somebody that might, with careful nurturing, become a very solid contributing member of your life. So be very careful about that. Go gradually. So I closed this out. I said, yeah, interest, even interest though, that with time, sometimes it can fade or diminish. There's been subjects that I've been interested in my life that I stayed with it for maybe a year or a few months, and then I had enough. I moved on. So sometimes it's like that with teachings of theosophy with people. But if you can help transform that into a deeper level, that is the ultimate. And this usually happens when the teachings begin to resonate at a very deep level, and not just amusing somebody intellectually. Or if they hear a speaker that really motivates them, that can happen, inspires them. Something the speaker says inspires them. They want to become a part of that. They want to know more. And then something is very important is taking place, and that is enthusiasm, the spark. The reason I said spark of enthusiasm, because when you start a fire with a spark, it can grow to a big flaming fire. And that's what enthusiasm can take hold of you in a good way, in a good way. And it can give you lots of energy to do things. If you're not interested, if I wasn't interested in this would be, giving this talk would not be much fun. But because I like what I'm doing, I love my job, there's enthusiasm, there's energy, and it's the same for you. When you give a talk about something you're interested in, you love to do it. And I ended that quote with I ended that essay with a quote by L.W. Rogers. He was a very, very popular lecturer in the 1930s and 40s. This is from a little book called Hints to Young Students on Occultism. Anyway, short quote. I like short quotes. Enthusiasm is a thing of priceless value. It's priceless. It really is. And so keep that in mind when you are, especially when you have new people visiting your group for the first time, especially then. Try to be enthusiastic. Convey enthusiasm. It's so important because that may make the difference between lighting that spark within them, or maybe they're at the curious stage of curiosity and you can move them into the interest stage. So it's very important. Think about how you talk, how you look, and just something to think about. It's priceless, it really is. And when you think about it, think of all the people that you've watched on TV or on the internet who have given talks on, not theosophy, but anything, who really get your interest, they grab it. There's excitement, there's enthusiasm there, right? Oh, one more thing. I also differentiate between enthusiasm and excitement. Anybody care to, I think there's a difference. Anybody care to guess what that difference might be? It's a big difference. What about excitement? Does it always last for a long time?
Short-lived.
Short-lived, yes, yes. Excitement can be very intense, very intense. You can actually feel your body. You can, your metabolism can go up, but it can burn out. It's like a flame that burns out real quickly. Enthusiasm may not burn that brightly in the beginning, but it's like the marathon runner who can go the distance. Excitement is like the sprint, the 90-yard dash. It's over quickly in a minute or so. It's over. But to cultivate enthusiasm, think of it as a marathon. You're a marathon runner. You're running a long distance for theosophy. This is a lifetime. Actually, if you've really studied it and understand it, this is more than one lifetime. This is lifetimes, plural. More than one lifetime. It's a long march. It's a long journey. And you have to have enthusiasm. Otherwise, you'll get weary. You'll get tired. You'll burn out. You have to pace yourself. You have to pace yourself. So I thank you. I've said about all I cared to say about those essays. I hope I've stimulated some ideas or thinking amongst you. And, I'd like to thank you for choosing my book to study. I hope you enjoy the rest of it. I enjoyed writing it, putting it together. I enjoyed the editing process. And, I don't know that I'll ever have the time to write another book, but if this is the only book that I write, I'm happy with it. And I hope it provides you some fruitful sessions in the future. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Please do it again.
Thanks, Dave.
Dave, thank you very much for sharing your enthusiasm with us.
Thank you, and thank you for participating too. I'm glad I wasn't the only one talking. I was hoping I would. Sometimes you get with groups and they're afraid to talk, but this was good. Everybody, I hate to be the only one talking, so thank you very much.
We learned a lot today, so it's good to share the idea to everyone. and get the idea. So it's a good class. Thank you, sir.
Good. Well, it's good to
Thank
see the Houston Lodge members. I hope things go well. I hope you continue with your Zoom meetings, and I hope you have a good session with Crystal Bowers in September. I think he's looking forward to that. I think originally he was going to fly down here, but that was when COVID hit, right? It was April, or I forget exactly. I had to cancel a lot of national speakers. Oh, it was terrible. I had to cancel about 12 or 13 national speaker appointments. It's sad. But we're getting some of them up on Zoom now, and we're dealing with it the best we can. As Mr. Van Lee and I talked earlier, we hope soon, I think we all hope we'll get back to normal at some point. Hopefully soon, people are just wanting to get back to normal and not having to wear a mask and be able to sit down in restaurants and, not be afraid. So,
Yes.
but we'll do the best we can. And in the meantime, stay healthy, stay well. And once again, thank you for inviting me. So
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Yeah, have a good one. And be
Thank you.
safe.